I knew this interview would be really exciting and that I would learn something about myself. I hadn't actually thought of that before. And how wonderful that just one thought, one conversation could be so monumental.
Christine Tracy is a university professor, a journalist, and a parent who made a radical transformation in her life and how she sees herself and the world. The transformation came as she was struggling with pain, conflict, and betrayal. She went through addiction, infidelity, divorce, and a near death experience. In the midst of all this turmoil over the years, she gradually found a clarity of mind that aligned with the teachings of an unorthodox, mystic Jesuit priest. The mystic helped her articulate her path from crisis and trauma to wonder and awe in life. Christine Tracy explains what happened to her in her memoir, Just Trust Life, A Journey with Teilhard de Chardin. The process for Christine was not simply following a formula that she found written in a book. She was an active participant in what happened. It was her life, her experience, her resilience. How much of her transformation came from within a person like that? Now, let's find out from her. So, my question: the climax in your memoir is a near death experience at 50 years of age. After overcoming addiction, overcoming infidelity, enduring a divorce, you almost died and had an out of body experience, which is like a mystical or transcendental experience. This is the description in your book as you have a heart attack. In your words, my heart stopped, but I lift, float, glide away. I am weightless. Confused because I see my body floating and I feel myself inside it at the same time. I pass through a doorway to a foggy place, no pulse, no heartbeat. I am floating. I can see my body below me on the stretcher, but I am not in it. It feels good where I am. You describe the experience more, and then you say, I landed sharply, abruptly, firmly back in my body with a thud like plop. Time started again. Tick, tick, tick. My question: can you describe more what this experience felt like and the revelation it gave you?
Thank you, Sean. And it's wonderful to hear that description again and to be reminded of that experience because it was almost 20 years ago for me. The thing that surprised me the most in that experience was the deep peace and calm that I felt, that I wasn't scared. It wasn't like I welcomed death, but the feeling I had was peaceful and calm and welcomed. And I'd like to say that I saw more in my head because I read books like The Journey of Souls, or you watch TV shows about what the afterlife is like. And I didn't really see anything like that, but I deeply felt this calm and this peace and the rightness to it. That it was okay. It was okay to be there. I wasn't scared. Um, but as you know from the second part of that story is that I came back, right? And obviously I came back because I'm here this morning talking to you. Um, I I felt like I was in choice, right? I felt this great need to come back into my body because I had just moved to Michigan to take a teaching job at Eastern Michigan University, where I was an assistant professor. And my young son, Mike, who was a senior in high school at the time, he was probably 17, 16, he was with me, and we were the only family we had in Michigan was me. So the only way he could live very well was for me to come back and help take care of him. And the overarching message of that moment for me, which took me a long time to share with other people because I was afraid of not being believed, was that we're in choice. It was very, very clear to me then, and it's still very clear to me, perhaps even more clear having written the book, that we're always in choice. We just don't always know it. And that my choice in that moment, when I said, I can't leave, I need to come back, there's nobody here to take care of Mike, that my choice was honored in that moment.
What you describe in your near death experience is your experience. This is not a description you got from a book. It's not a description that you analyze from a book. It is your experience in your moment of revelation. All the conflict in your book is what you experienced personally, but you have to find the words to express it. One of the words you use in your book is transcendence. You say, if my whole life was a prayer, then everything, especially the pain, was an opportunity to transcend. Your near death experience sounds like a mystical, transcendental experience. Some mystical experiences seem to be elaborate and exotic visions, like, say, the visions of the 18th century Swedish mystic Swedenborg. Others seem to be some kind of enhanced clarity of the mundane, a sense of awe and wonder and mystery in the here and now, like a child seeing life without an adult's context. In your memoir, you invoke the words of a mystic. You are searching for a context to articulate what happened to you, what you felt, what you thought. The analytical part of my brain wants to ask you, was this near death experience a mystical experience? But I'm not going to ask you that question. What I'm going to ask is, what I think I should ask is, does it matter to you whether this was a mystical experience or not? If you could forget everything you've read, including the mystic Teilhard, if you had no other context by yourself, however impossible that is, what would you feel this strange near-death experience was?
It was a confirmation for me of my own power. That in that moment, I made a very important and decisive decision, that I was in choice, that my intention was very, very clear in that moment, in my heart, in my soul, all those words to describe what our interior life is like. I wanted to come back. I wanted to take care of my son. While the other side, if you might call it that, the place where I was beautiful, was calm, was peaceful. I was at peace. I wasn't afraid. I, in that moment, I chose, no, that my love and my devotion to my son overrided that. So that, I would say that it was a clear, perhaps pristine moment of choice, when both the choice was very clear, but also my intention was very clear. There was no doubt in my mind.
So you had a revelation of a pristine moment of choice, which means you didn't have a realization of that before. How is it possible in your life that you got this far without having a sense of choice?
I would say that I was in brain fog, perhaps. That in other moments of my life, I was distracted, perhaps over-focused. People have described me as type A, right? At Rensselaer, where I went to grad school, we would talk about left brainers and right brainers and whole brainers. I spent a lot of my life up in my head. And uh, it was like having many paths to follow, right? Like on your way to the library, for example, in your town, how many roads are there? How many ways are there to get there? And in that, so I would perhaps try those different routes and then realize I wasn't going to get there that way. So the opportunities for lots of different choices perhaps were confusing for me. And in this moment, in this out of body experience, there was only two choices, right? Leave my body or stay in my body. So and I like that word pristine or perhaps singular, that I wasn't presented with all these different choices.
I think you'd agree that there's a difference between wanting beliefs to guide oneself and curiosity as a form of open inquiry. Beliefs are often connected to group beliefs and doctrine. Curiosity as a form of inquiry seems to have more personal freedom and maybe in the purest, pristine form is not goal directed. If that distinction between beliefs and curiosity makes sense of you, how do you distinguish between beliefs and curiosity in your life? Were you seeking a set of beliefs from the mystic Teilhard to use in your life or something else? What did you want from the mystic?
Uh, it was, speaking about clarity and purity of ideas, the thing that I wanted was to learn how to do what he did through perseverance and focus. I understood, having studied his life as well as his teachings, but more clearly from his life, that he was able to overcome adversity. That somehow, when life got really hard for him, he was able to turn those moments into opportunities of transcendence. And I'd like to use that word again, because it's not perhaps transcendence in the sense of moving into a different realm or being in a different world, but being in this world in a different, more directed, more powerful way. One of the concepts that I took from him was this sense of interior navigation, that within each inside of us, there's always a part of us that knows where to go and what to do. But perhaps it's the noise in our heads, right? Those different roadways, the different distractions that keep us from that. And one of those is emotions. I'm thinking now about the scene in my memoir when I fought the fire in my apartment. And looking back, losing my doctoral research in that moment, or perhaps even losing my life, was huge. But somehow inside of me, I knew what to do. I managed to go to the bathroom, empty out the garbage can, and be brave enough to put the fire out by myself. So it was getting back to Teilhard. It was Teilhard's ability over and over again to reinvent himself and be internally driven, using that internal navigation as a guidance, especially when the seas of his life got rough.
What is remarkable about your story is how your consciousness changes while you're enduring the troubles of your life. But what caused the change in your consciousness? Did something cause you to change, or did you change yourself? I think you'd agree that the troubles you were dealing with didn't cause the change in your consciousness, and nobody forced you to change. So, how do you explain how you were able to change?
Um, that's such a fabulous question. And thank you for asking it, because I'm learning so much about myself. And I'm thinking now of the moment when I decided I wasn't going to drink anymore. I can tell you exactly where I was. I was in my office slash bed, one of the bedrooms of my house in the marital residence in upstate New York. And the night before, I had really totally embarrassed myself. That's a scene in the book. I embarrassed myself at a fancy dinner that was given to honor a distinguished professor at Rensselaer that I was privileged enough to be invited to. And I drank so much that I had to be driven home. So when I woke up that morning and sobered up, I realized what I was doing to myself, that I was the one who was putting too much alcohol in my body. And in that moment, the word we use in the recovery community is surrender. I surrendered a part of myself, perhaps the lower part of myself, the self that was self-destructive, and held on to the I don't know if I want to use this word belief, but understanding that I could be more. It was like reaching up to be another part of myself. And I remember talking to someone who was supporting me, and she said, let's start over. And I knew from that moment onward, I have never had a drink, and that was 24 years ago.
But what's the difference in how you changed between your ability to change and somebody in the same circumstances who doesn't change?
A recognition, an internal recognition that change is possible, and the desire to make that possible. And perhaps getting back to the word mystical, I don't quite understand that moment, because there were other moments when I told myself I wasn't going to drink anymore, and I did. But that moment was very, very different. Perhaps an opening and a seeing that there was something else, like swimming in the sea of possibility in that moment. And as I write in the memoir, pain pushed me to that place. I was in in that moment, I wasn't only in great emotional pain from thinking I might lose my full scholarship, all the hard work I'd done in the doctoral program, the respect and love of my family and friends, but also I was in great physical pain because I broke my collarbone. So there was something about the intensity of both of those feelings, the physical and the emotional, that I believe was like a breakthrough. And as I'm talking to you now, I almost see it as like a burst of sun, right? That I don't want that much pain anymore. And that pain can be a wonderful motivator.
You know, that phrase, a burst of sun, that sounds like an archetypal psychic emblem.
Um, I'm just feeling and seeing it now, sitting here and talking to you, and being really proud that I can say to you and to your audience for the podcast that I haven't had a drink in 24 years, and what that meant, and the real shift in my life, and not just in my life. I see other people too have continued to make that choice. And it's almost impossible to know what that choice looks like unless you've been in that hell. To be a slave to alcohol or other substances that seem to take possession of you. To have that freedom, the freedom of choice, like choice, in bold face. The choices I'm able to have now because I don't do that anymore.
What I've described in your experience seems to be changes in openness to experience, unfiltered by previous preconceptions. Some mystics make this point when they say you must see the world as though you had the eyes of a child. The child is not limited by adult preconceptions. Do you remember this kind of openness as an aspect of your character earlier in life, or was this totally new to you? Do you recall parts of your own childhood in this way, or observations of your own children? Have there been other influence in your life of this openness, maybe with people or animals or children that you observed, or some kind of experience?
Um, as you ask that question, the first thought that comes to me is being very, very young. And I have an identical twin sister. And I'm guessing in this memory, I'm maybe 3 or 4 years old, maybe 5. And I looked at my identical twin sister, and we were inseparable. We wore the same clothes, we did the same things. We had a younger sister, but for the most part, it was us. And I looked at her in that moment and realized that while we looked alike on the outside, that she wasn't thinking what I was thinking. And I believe it was my first recognition of my interiority, that I had a consciousness.
You were explaining that moment with your twin sister. You're 3 to 5 years old, and you become you become self reflective, you become aware of your own consciousness, and you become aware that your twin sister has a different consciousness and is thinking and feeling different things. Psychologists call this theory of mind, and it's used in primatology, as I know from interviewing orangutan scientists, that higher intelligent creatures have what you're describing, the ability to recognize that the ability of self-reflectiveness, ability to recognize that they're conscious of their own consciousness, which is self-reflection,
Mhm.
and they're conscious of the differences of others. You know, that strikes me, that moment that you just described strikes me as what made all this possible in your life.
Um, I knew this interview would be really exciting and that I would learn something about myself. I hadn't actually thought of that before. And how wonderful that just one thought, one conversation could be so monumental. Uh, Looking back on my life, and as I sit here in my workspace and look at my diploma and all my books, um, I think I had the belief before some of these experiences that I outlined in the memoir and that we're talking about now, that the answer wasn't in a book or in study, or even perhaps worse than that, in somebody else's mind. If I could figure out what everybody else knew, then I could do that too and get it right, and I wouldn't have to suffer. And I actually believe a lot of um, the religions in our world are set up that way, that there's a sense of, believe this, do this, and that is the right way. And in recognizing that how important that moment was, and that changed my life, I realized that we're more empowered than we think we are. I sometimes wonder at where I got the courage to be that vulnerable and to be that open. Um, but I don't need to know. I'm excited about that I can say that. I can just simply feel it and say, wow, I can't believe I did that, because now that I look at it, I look back and go, wow, look at that. That was me. And there was a transformation. We started the discussion talking about transformation. So there was a transformation I couldn't even have imagined that was possible.